Coaches, welcome to the Better Coaching Podcast powered by RYG Athletics, a proud provider of Nike sports camps. The mission of this podcast is simple. We want to help coaches get better. We do it by connecting coaches with ideas and strategies they can implement to grow as a coach and a leader to ultimately better serve their players and teams. I'm excited to welcome Zach Brandon to the podcast for this episode. Zach Brandon is the founder of Threshold Performance Coaching, where he partners with coaches, teams, and executives to strengthen mindset, leadership, and performance from the inside out. His work focuses on helping coaches build systems and leadership skills that sustain both professional excellence and personal well-being. For 7 years, Zach served as head of mental performance and coach development for the Arizona Diamondbacks in Major League Baseball. He continues to serve organizations as a leadership performance consultant, supporting staff development and leadership growth initiatives. Before his time in Major League Baseball, Zach was a mental conditioning coach at IMG Academy in Florida, consulting with athletes in baseball, basketball, tennis, and track and field, including Olympic competitors. He's also listed on the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee's mental performance registry. A former college athlete, Zach holds dual master's degrees in kinesiology and organizational leadership, along with a certification as a certified mental performance consultant through the Association for Applied Sports Psychology. In this episode, we discuss sideways versus backwards comparison, the 4 C's for high-achieving leaders, and the 4 factors needed to foster a winning and sustainable environment for the people you lead. And before we dive into the show, if you're interested in learning more about how we serve and work with coaches, you can head to the show details for links to the free newsletter, free podcast note, our free community for coaches of over 300 coaches, and or information on becoming one of our Nike Sports Camp directors. Now to the show. Enjoy. Coaches, welcome back to the podcast. Super excited to be joined by Zach Brandon today. Zach, thank you for joining me, and I would love it if you just started off and introduced yourself to the audience, told them a little bit about you and your background in sport and the work you do currently.
Yeah, well, first off, Luke, I'm humbled by the invitation. I think what you've done, I got a chance to go back and listen to some of the prior conversations that you've had, and I think the message is the questions that you're posing to different leaders, different coaches, and so on. I think are really useful, and I think there's a lot of people that can get an immense amount of value from it. I don't think we can have enough of these resources, so I appreciate the work that you're doing. I guess for me, it's funny that you ask it right now because it's a little bit dynamic and in a space of like this kind of unknown kind of space for me because that question is coming after I've spent the last 7 years working in professional baseball, most recently serving as the head of mental performance and coach development for the Arizona Diamondbacks. Spent all 7 years in professional baseball with them, servicing players and coaches from across the organization. But I am a month into stepping into this new chapter, this new season of my kind of professional career of kind of running my own coaching practice and trying to be a leadership and kind of performance advisor for coaches. So when people kind of ask like, "Oh, what do you do?" It's like I kind of have boiled it down to like I help sport coaches win more and live better. Like, and I think those two things sometimes get separated. I think sometimes it's we put so many chips and eggs in the basket of how do we win more and how do we cultivate high performing teams and cultures and things like that. And I love to win just as much, I think, as any coach. And at the same time, what I over the course of time have kind of come to feel and realize is like I didn't for myself, but also now for others, want to help them not win at the expense of losing themselves in the process. And so that for me is kind of this space that I'm into. I'm kind of fresh into this transition and kind of building my own thing, which has been kind of fun. And it's a new challenge. It's a totally different kind of experience for me, but it's something that I've become really invigorated by and having conversations with folks like yourself that kind of share a passion for it has become something really I've really just enjoyed being able to fill my calendar with these types of conversations.
Yeah, hey, it is invigorating, right? Like building something, whether you're a coach building a team or a program, or you're yourself, building a business, serving coaches. Like it's invigorating, and I think it brings a lot of life out of us when we're presented with a challenge, and we've got to figure it out, try to build something, move towards the vision that we have. I love what you shared there, just around your desire to help coaches win more and live better. I think what you said there, I resonated deeply with. Of too often coaching becomes so all consuming, and it's easy for coaches to lose themselves, who they are, in the grind of the job, the expectation, the pressure. And it's different at different levels: pro, college, youth, high school. But there's really tough factors at every level that can burn coaches out. Um, and I think we're going to dive more into that. But before we get there, I read the latest newsletter that you wrote, and you were talking about comparison. And I think this is such an apt topic for coaches because sport by nature, right? There's a scoreboard to it. There's wins and losses. There's your record. There's your standings, right? There's so much comparison that happens in it. And I think that place of comparison can be a dangerous place for a lot of coaches, just mentally, right? Talking about them living better, them performing at their best. I think if coaches get sucked into a dangerous comparison trap, it can prevent them from being at their best, and being able to maintain their performance in a really tough job. So I'd love if you just shared a little bit about what you wrote about in your newsletter, sideways versus backwards comparison, and why you think it's important for coaches.
I'll share a message that we actually shared with our major league team a couple years ago, that kind of I think goes hand in hand with this, and I'll connect it. Is like it was getting kind of towards the end of the year, and we were in the playoff hunt, and inevitably with the media stories being written, fan commentary and different people, everybody has an opinion and things like that. There's a lot of just outside noise that can potentially creep into a clubhouse or become a distraction or things like that. And so one of the messages that we shared, this was again kind of late October, or I mean, not late October, late August, kind of early September, was to really just focus on like committing to running our own race and not being so concerned with who's to our left, who's to our right, who's ahead of us, who's behind us, and so on. But I bring that up because I think that's such a natural thing for us to do as human beings. And so I think that's where it applies to coaches too, like what you mentioned. Like just look at, I mean, this conversation's even unfolding in a really interesting time in kind of the college sports sphere if we just want to tap into college, because it's like you literally just have a head coach at a Power 4 conference, at a top program, now having to leave to go coach, another program. He can't even coach his team in, the potential college football playoff, in Lane Kiffin, all this. So I say all that though, because like, because of the way there's all these headlines and narratives and things like it's so hard for us sometimes not to compare with those around us. And I think to your point, it can become extremely unhealthy. It can become extremely anxiety producing. It can become um, because it's incomplete, and I think sometimes we start looking around, and if you're a coach and you start thinking about where you hope to be in your career and you start comparing yourself to who's next to you, which I kind of in this particular newsletter framed it as sideways comparison. Like when you get so caught up in looking to your left and right about what other people are doing, you might not realize that there's been a lot more behind the scenes for that person to get them to the point that they're at. And so you're kind of sometimes only comparing yourself to an incomplete picture as to where they are. And you might not see that, like, oh, like you want to. I talked to a longtime NBA executive recently, and one of the things that he said, he's like, everybody, I get asked a lot, like, hey, I want to do what you did. And like, I want to know like what it's going to take. And he's like, if you want to know, or if you want to do what I did, like, you're going to have to do all the things that I did prior to that, which was like 2+ decades, 3 decades of experience that wasn't just being at the very top, it was building himself up. And so, again, I think that comparison game happens a lot for us. And so, the reason I kind of wrote this particular newsletter is because I know sometimes we position comparison as like the thief of joy. Like that's kind of the very common sentiment that gets expressed. And what I think is actually the issue isn't comparison in of itself, it's where you direct it. And that was really what I guess the point of the newsletter was, is that when you get caught up in the sideways comparison and where you stand relative to your peers and those around you, it can be misleading and it can be, again, be incomplete. On the other hand, if you compare yourself to where you've been, then what you might start to realize is that maybe you're actually covering more ground or you're making more progress than you would have otherwise realized, that you're much further along. And I remember having this coach, there was, or this conversation with a major league player a couple years ago. There was I'm drawing a blank on which particular influencer this was, but they shared a soundbite that I thought was a really great soundbite. And the soundbite was something to the effect of, you've already achieved things that you once said would make you proud. And I was having this conversation with this player because he was like, man, that's so true. Like, he's like, if I were to go back in time 10 years ago, like the things that I'm currently accomplishing, I would be thrilled about. Like, I would take those any day. But in the moment, sometimes we get hooked up by other people, what they're doing, and or we start to push the goalposts further away from us in our with our own goals and our own expectations and things like that. So that really the point of I guess the newsletter was, hey, I don't necessarily think comparison is necessarily inherently bad, but where you direct it matters.
Yeah, and you said it in there that when we direct it sideways, it can often be so anxiety producing. I think that's so true for coaches and for young people, the pro, college, high school, youth athletes that you're working with, right? Especially young people these days. Like comparison, it's just rampant in our society and culture, especially fueled by online and social media, et cetera, right? Like people are comparing sideways constantly. And I think for coaches to even introduce that concept to your teams, hey, let's talk about how we compare. Comparison is not the issue, but it's how and where we compare. Let's stop comparing sideways. Let's start comparing against ourselves, right? Where were we last year? Where do we want to go? I think what you kind of said in there too that resonates a little bit is there's also this tension for high performers, people that want to achieve success of I should be really proud about where I am right now because I've come a long way when I compare backwards. And also the goalpost does keep moving forward and I want to keep raising that level, right? And to be able to hold both of those things in a healthy space where I can compare backwards and look at the growth I've taken and then also say, and there's still more I want to do. There's still more that I want to accomplish. Yeah, that can be hard, I think, for anybody, for coaches or players to be able to kind of sit in that middle of appreciating where you've come and then still looking forward to where you want to go without it being anxiety producing or making you feel like, oh, I'm not enough.
It, I think a couple of things that you said in there that are really important is on one hand, there's this piece of it, like this isn't the sole reason why we compare, but part of this is like inherent in all of us is this desire to belong, to like to simultaneously kind of fit in to the environment and with the people and around us, but also kind of stand out and be our own person and have, individuality as well. So there's this like balance that we have. And yet, at any given time, if we start to feel like we're going to detach from the group or separate from the group or be alienated from the group, and that sense of belonging gets threatened, that again becomes there's this like survival mechanism built into us that we try to avoid that at all costs. As part of that, one of the reasons why we compare is to prevent that from happening. So we can look around us and say, hey, am I on track with other people around me? And again, it's well intentioned, but to your point, it can be anxiety provoking. The other thing too that I think is something that I try to share. This is another way that I guess think about comparison. It's a concept. There's a really great book. It's called The Gap and the Gain. It's a concept or a framework that I've referenced quite a bit to players because I think again it kind of helps you direct your focus and where you're comparing yourself to in a more healthy way. So let's go to like opening day. If we were to use baseball, for example, or really any sport you can fill this in with, inevitably you're going to have an ideal for how that season's going to play out. You're going to have goals that you set for yourself, expectations you set for yourself, maybe even expectations that other people hand you. And along the way, you're going to make progress towards those goals. And what I think sometimes happens is we sabotage our own confidence and even our own well-being because as we make progress, the only thing we compare ourselves to is where we're at today to the ideal that we set for ourselves. So you get fixated on the gap is kind of what they how they frame it. Now the gap is helpful as we know as coaches, like practice, training, so much of that sometimes is rooted in like how do we help you fix your gaps? Like how do we help you improve and get better? And like that's important. But there comes a point where that becomes detrimental if that becomes the sole focus. Like 'cause occasionally you have to be able to look backward and compare yourself to where you were when you started. What are new skills or abilities that you possess today that maybe you didn't have when you started? Because I think I referenced this even in the newsletter. It's like I've had conversations with players where they're a couple months in and their stats are terrible. But if you ask them, are you a better player today than where you were at on opening day? Inevitably, oftentimes they say yes, but they're not focused on that. They're not acknowledging those ways that they've grown and matured, and they're not making the same mistakes that they once did, and so on down the line. So I say all that. I think that gap and that gain distinction is something that I also like to reference because, again, I think it starts to ask yourself, okay, with where I'm at today, am I comparing myself to my ideals? And am I comparing myself, or am I comparing myself to where I started? And again, similar to sideways versus like the back, it's like, it's not saying you should never compare. It's just saying to make sure that you do it in a way that's healthy. And there's probably a need for both.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, you said run your own race. That's so good. I think any coach can take that nugget with them and yeah, to share that with your players too. Yeah, for your team to have that, hey, run your own race. I love where you started with that topic. I want to talk now a little bit more about yeah, why you decided to kind of transition away from working more closely with athletes on the mental performance side of things and your kind of passion for helping coaches win more and live better. I'm guessing that in part stems from struggles you've seen coaches going through and obviously a belief that you can help them overcome those struggles, win more, live better. Will you talk about that? Like, what are the major issues, challenges, struggles that you are witnessing? Yeah, coaches are experiencing right now.
Yeah, I think the catalyst for me was kind of twofold in making the transition. On one hand, we talked before we hit record about like our kids, and like that for me was something that was at the heart of the decision to transition from my full-time role. Is like I did not love the feeling of the mornings of leaving on a road trip and packing your suitcase and like knowing it's going to be a bit before you see him or having to be on the road and watch them maybe grow up through FaceTime and videos and things like that. And I know that's certainly a sacrifice that so many coaches have had to make. For me, on one hand, I just was at this given time and juncture in my life, I just didn't feel like that was what I wanted to continue doing. But the other side of it is kind of going hand in hand. Like I know a lot of coaches that are struggling with that. I know a lot of coaches that um, have, for different reasons, and some within their control and some outside of their control, have poured so much into everybody else and their players and their teams and all the people that kind of fall under their responsibility, and yet they haven't had somebody pour into them. And over the last few years in my role, like, yes, I've been a resource for our players, particularly at the major league level during my time with the Diamondbacks. But the conversations that I found myself most looking forward to on a regular basis were the ones with the coaches. It was the ones with them because I was so intrigued by the different challenges that they were facing. Some of that, again, pertaining to the emotional, mental toll and the sustainability challenges of being a coach at a really high level and wanting to be great at what you do, but also knowing that there's a cost attached to that and how do you balance those things. So I really enjoyed those types of conversations. And I also just enjoyed the problems of trying to figure out how do you help coaches be better extensions of, as a mental performance coach, because I tell coaches, like, whether you signed up to be a mental coach or not, like, or therapist or whatever term you want to use, like, you are like you
Yeah,
wear
you
all the
are.
hats.
Yeah,
You
whether
are
you want
like,
it or not, you
for
are
sure.
one.
Sometimes that's for the players, sometimes that's for your staff, sometimes that's for the parents, like, you name it, administration and so on. So I just found myself being really invigorated by those kind of conversations and trying to figure out how can we help coaches solve those things. So on one hand, how do we help them become the best version of themselves as a leader and what goes into that, but then also foster an environment that brings out the best in all those that they lead and serve as well. So that, for me, those were kind of the biggest, I guess, catalysts. And the one other thing that I'll say, that this is very recent, just in the last like week or two, and I had this revelation during a conversation with a college basketball coach. The reason why I think I didn't have words to this until recently, but like, the reason why I've always felt very passionate about trying to help coaches be better mental performance coaches and facilitators of high performing environments is because at the professional level, like, I didn't play professional baseball. I played college baseball, but I wasn't a professional athlete. And a sentiment that I've that has really struck for me is that for anybody, you are most powerfully positioned to serve the person that you once were. And as a coach, a professional sport coach, like, if you were to use that concept, like, you're most powerfully positioned to serve athletes, professional athletes. So, and in that way, so for me, it became I wanted to work to and through coaches day to day in my approach, and that was, again, I think, how my approach evolved over the course of time with the Diamondbacks, but it also has now migrated into my work now, kind of serving coaches in a more one-on-one setting or being an advisor for coaching staffs and things like that. So anyway, all that to say, those were kind of the catalyst for the transition. And then the quick thing I'll say, and then we can expand on it, is in terms of challenges that I think I'm facing, I think you're facing some of what we talked about. I think it's the weight that they're carrying, which isn't just the pressure to perform and excuse me, it isn't just the pressure to perform at a very high level and the scrutiny, but like, there's also a lot of uncertainty in the coaching profession. There's a lot of criticism that comes with it. There's a lot of coaches that got into the profession to because they care about people. They love the relationships. They wanted to make a positive impact. And yet, when they look at their calendar, sometimes they feel like that's only a small percentage of what they're afforded time to do so. That there's all these other things that kind of um, hook and take away their attention, and they don't really have systems for how to protect their time, both in their job and at home, and those types of things. So anyway, I think those are to just, I think, just name a few. There's certainly a laundry list of challenges that come in the profession nowadays, but again, I just have found that those have been the ones that I've been felt most called to try to serve and be a thought partner for.
Yeah, that's really good. I want to talk more about that. Really, the issues you're describing there, I think, for coaches at a lot of levels, probably really resonate there. And I think we're really talking about. I think there's some connection to the winning part. We're talking about the living better part, right? For coaches, like how do we live well in the midst of what is a demanding job. I say it often. It's like there's no other job that I can think of in our society aside from like maybe politicians where it's like your performance is on public display and criticized by a bunch of people who've never done the job before, right? And then the tumultuousness of like how stable is your job, are you going to be fired, et cetera, all that. But what you were sharing there too, just around why they got into it is often not what they're really able to do with their time, or they feel like they're pulled in so many other directions, or that they can't be what they want to be at home or as a coach, etc. Right? You name it. So talk to me more about how you're working with coaches in these tough spots, about how to live well in the midst of it.
Analogy that I've really grown to appreciate is I don't know if you're familiar with like the term Sherpas at all, but like mountain climbers when they're scaling a mountain, they have these Sherpas who are in essence these expert guides that have been up and down the mountain before. They're familiar with the terrain, the environment. They know what resources they need. They have quality like decision making around, the different stressors that they're going to face and how to navigate those and how to adjust and different things like that. I bring that up because like I think for me, what I'm stepping into is trying to be a Sherpa for coaches. They're climbing their own mountain, whatever that mountain is for them, whatever their dream is as a coach, and being a guide along the way to kind of help them navigate that terrain. Now, I think in order to do that, um, a lot of the work is built around, conversations that we have in a one-on-one setting. But one thing I'm very kind of quick to say, and I know others go a different route, and that's totally fine. That can work for them. I always tell the coaches that I work with, like, there's no I don't have a program, like I don't have a curriculum, like I don't have an ebook, or anything like that. It's like, but I do have a system. Like I do have a system rooted in things that I'm listening for when a coach is sharing not only what they hope to achieve, but also what's getting in the way. And a lot of times that can be external things, it could be lack of feeling like time, it could be lack of resources, lack of administrative support, it could be dealing with parents that they're, facing criticism from or whatever the case might be. And also sometimes we as coaches, similar to players, we get in our own way too. So sometimes those blocks are internal. And so what I'm often trying to do is listen to a coach to hear the things that maybe they are not naming explicitly that might be getting in the way or an obstacle for them to scale whatever that mountain is for them. So for me, I don't again coach anybody through a program, but I do have a framework that I use, and I've kind of boiled it down to if anybody's ever read The Inner Game of Tennis, one of the things that they talk about is that your performance is the equation is your performance equals potential minus interference. I've adapted that where I've replaced potential with the individual times the environment minus interference is going to shape your performance or your results and outcomes as a coach. So to get to your question about, some of these inherent challenges and things I'm seeing, I start with the inner game of leadership as I frame it, which is really about the individual. And I kind of have sifted this down to 4 C's: clarity, capacity, consistency, and courage. And again, what I'm listening for is, are any of those four potentially, is there a gap there that's maybe getting in the way for somebody? Or are any of those a strength that we can leverage, that we can kind of double down on and use in a more deliberate way to help them achieve the results that they want? So let me give you an example. You used the term scoreboard earlier. And I love that you also talked a little bit about society and the expectations that they have and the narratives that get spun. And so one of the things that I try to always start with as kind of a foundation is asking questions to coaches to get really clear on who they are and create clarity around how they define success. what their strengths are, what their values are, what's important to them, not only in what they accomplish, but who they're becoming in pursuit of that. And the analogy that's really kind of stuck for me that I really like is I think every coach has to deal with two scoreboards. Society scoreboard, which values things like wins, fame, money, accolades, championships, all great things, like all things that like I think most coaches like would love more of those things. But if that's the only scoreboard that you live by, you're potentially going to pursue something at a cost that you're not going to be aware of that's going to eventually kind of drain you, and it's eventually going to sabotage your well-being, and it's eventually going to affect relationships in your life and so on down the line. So that's where I'm one of the things I like to help coaches do is define their personal scoreboard. What is your own version of success look like? And now once you've defined that, most importantly, does your calendar align with that? Do you have time built in your day? So, for example, like a lot of coaches I know, part of their personal scoreboard is relationships, connection. Okay, how are you deliberate in structuring your day and creating a system for your day to pour into the relationships that matter to you? Yes, that can be with your players. Yes, that can be pertaining to your job. And again, kind of to live better beyond just the field. It's like, how are you deliberate in structuring your time with your family as well, or loved ones? And where are you making sure that you're deliberate in carving that time out proactively versus just trying to um, use what's left of your time? Because inevitably we know, like, as coaches, like your time gets stolen very quickly because everybody's coming to you for things. So anyway, all that to say, that for me is a really important framework that I'm listening for, is listening for those four C's, figuring out what's getting in the way of the goal and that mountain that they're trying to climb, and then figuring out for me as a guide how I can help them. And again, that's just one piece of it. I have other things that go into the environment side and how you foster a sustainable winning environment. But that's where I like to start is with those four C's.
Yeah, before we get into the other side, the winning and sustainable environment, I want to talk more about those four C's. You just walked through the clarity really well. I resonate with that. I think it's so important for any coach, any leader, like in anything that you're doing, to know who you are, to have a clear definition of success, to know your values, to know what you are measuring and what matters to you. Like this, those things are huge. And I think it kind of started to bleed into that second one of capacity, right? Like, now is your capacity being put in the right boxes? Is your time going to the things that you've said you care about or the things you want to be measured by? Will you just talk about each of the C's a little bit more? Capacity, consistency, and courage. Like, what are you looking for? How are you trying to help coaches in those areas?
Yeah, so kind of jump into capacity. I think you kind of nailed it. Like for me, it comes down to like how are you protecting your time, your energy, your attention, your bandwidth, because those things are a limited resource. Like you don't have an unlimited amount of them. And so do you have a good system for how you're managing those things, how you're managing your stress, and how you're deliberately structuring your day to create space for filling those things again? Because I think that's one of the things that has just really struck me is like coaches pour so much into everybody else, and yet it's like, well, who's pouring into you? And you're also the person that everybody's coming to with questions and having like, hey, you got to help me put out this fire and solve this. Like it can be what I've noticed is that there's a lot of coaches that, yes, they're deliberate in some things in terms of how they're maybe practice design, setting up practice design, how they're, structuring their practices and drills and those types of things, but they're not always as proactively deliberate in carving out their time for those other things that fill them back up and increase their capacity. So one example is like I think a lot of coaches I know, like when you ask them when you've had maybe like a new insight like a new revelation or something that's like really struck you? Like, yes, those moments happen sometimes when you're in the cage or you're on the court with somebody or you're out on the range or something like that. Like, yes, that can happen sometimes. But I also noticed that sometimes those are like in margins when you gave yourself just purely time to think and recharge. So it's in the shower, it's on a walk with your dogs. It's in those moments too. And so I think that's one way is like, how can you be deliberate in carving out time so that way you don't burn out and that way you don't, get overwhelmed by the unending to-do list. Because that's another thing that I think, like I even know in my own work line of work for the last 7 years in professional baseball, like there is a never-ending to-do list. There is always something you could be doing. And I know for a lot of coaches, it's very difficult to like turn it off. Like I think just in the last day or so, I came across an interview with Monty Williams. He used to be an NBA head coach with the Phoenix Suns, and then I think more recently with the Detroit Pistons. He's now coaching high school basketball. But one of the things he was asked about was like the balance of being an NBA head coach and dealing with that. And one of the things he talked about is like he had a hard time turning it off. He had to be deliberate in his transition home to before he spent time with his family, like he had to like take his dogs for a walk and like go reset and decompress and detach from putting on that coaching hat. Things like that I think are important in trying to help coaches. I think that's another thing that I try to help them with when it comes to like helping with time is like this is why I'd say like I don't have like a resource library. I don't have like an ebook that I'm sending out every single week. Like when I work with coaches, like I try to be very deliberate to give them assist with clips, stories, principles, food for thought questions and things that I know will immediately be usable for them and practical for them because they don't have time to like scour the internet for a good clip to show to their players about visualization or to show their staff about the importance of designing a high quality learning environment. Like that's where I think I can kind of help. So that's capacity. Consistency, again, I think you'll quickly discover like these things feed into one another, but consistency is all about their habits and the results that they're getting and their execution. And because we use this in a lot of different ways, but like they say that your results are perfectly designed, or yeah, your results are a product of the system that you have in place. I butchered that a little bit, but uh, in essence, if you're not satisfied with your execution and the results that you're producing, then you have to look at your system and the routines and habits that you have in place, and then also ensure that like are they aligned again with those values that are important to you that you've defined on your personal scoreboard, or have you created habits that don't align with that are now sabotaging you in other way and creating stagnation or reactiveness or inconsistency. So anyway, that for me is the consistency. And then the last one, courage, is because I was intentional not to use the word confidence because I see this in mental performance, like in with athletes, like we typically like to frame confidence as a feeling. Feelings come and go. They're very inconsistent. They're very fleeting. I think confidence also has to be rooted in action. And I think that's where when you look at courage, like it can't just be something that you feel like, because oftentimes courage inherently means you are stepping into a situation or a conversation or some moment of pressure where you may not feel comfortable, you may not feel confident, you may have self doubt. And can you still choose to act in a way or speak in a way that is leading boldly under those circumstances? And so that for me is, I think, a really important piece. And I think that's where, again, kind of going back to like things that I do with coaches, like things I'm listening for are like fear of failure, perfectionism, because sometimes those things we feel like they help us because they push us, and yet they also can sometimes show up in ways where we play small or show up in ways where we don't delegate or we don't relinquish. control or we don't give ourselves grace and those types of things. So, anyway, for me, those four C's kind of comprise that inner game of leadership. And again, I'm kind of asking different questions to try to understand how are those showing up or lack thereof in a coach's life, and how can we accentuate them in a more helpful way.
Yeah, I like what you shared there around courage. I'm glad that's on your list too. I think it is a more appropriate term than, like you said, confidence. I just think about how many situations coaches find themselves in where courage is required to stay in alignment with their values or their identity or the vision, right? It's clear we're trying to go here. These are the kind of people we want and need. These are the things that are acceptable and not acceptable. And then often it is like, do I or we as coaches have the courage to have the hard conversation, to make the unpopular decision, to, like, you name it. Like, if you are not willing to make some courageous choices, you're probably not going to be a very healthy coach or a very successful coach, even, right? Just because I think there's so many situations where coaches have to be courageous. You have to do a brave thing. You have little control over what the outcome will be or what people will think of this, etc. But you have to choose to have some courage here to follow through on the consequence that you've given this player. To, like, you can name the things that require courage and coaching. Yeah, I resonate with that. I love that it's the last one because I think really it is like it has to wrap it all up. You have to have the courage to be consistent and to be honest about your capacity and prioritizing your family. You know what I mean? Like, it's just courage is the choice to make those hard choices or the ability to make those. Yeah, I resonate with that deeply. I think it's so important for coaches to just consider that. Like, do I have the courage to do these things?
Can I just add one thing with that? I love that you highlighted that. It's a good reminder too for me because one of the things that I think sometimes gets forgotten is as you as a coach have more distance between where you're at now and your playing career, as we talk, like we hear, like sometimes like you forget what certain things feel like. And as a player, you're being asked oftentimes on a day-to-day basis to go outside of your comfort zone, to challenge yourself, to stretch yourself in different ways. So as a coach, sometimes the more distance that you have, if you've not been deliberate in stretching yourself as a way, like you can like lose track of what that feels like. And I think that's an important thing to tap into. And I think that's where the courage, again starts to show up. And I even bring that up with like as it pertains to working with somebody in a coaching partnership. Like I'm the first to say, like I'll tell people when I have an initial call with them is like this isn't for everybody. Like if you're not ready to commit to it, like if you don't feel comfortable with it, or if you just want, again, a program, set of modules, like a resource library, like I'm not your person, not your person. Like, because part of that work, like, yes, I will share resources. Like, yes, I can share with you some content and things like that. But at the end of the day, like you're gonna have to put this into action. And then as we say with players, like you don't just learn from experience, you learn from reflecting on experience. And that's where I think having a thought partner, a guide, somebody there with you, they can help you ask the right questions. So that way, not only you learn from experience, but you accelerate it. Like you learn faster. And because you're asking the things that other people aren't asking themselves.
Yeah. I think it's so important too what you said there around coaches doing things that get them outside of their comfort zone. Like you said, we sometimes forget what it's like to be in the seat of our athletes. I'll just share like two personal examples. I'm not very good at golf yet, but a few years ago I started to get into a little bit. Lots of friends playing it, so I went and took some lessons with a golf pro. My wife got me this for my birthday. It was great, but it was the first time I'd been coached in something in like 6, 8 years since I was like in high school when at the time when I took these lessons, and it was like, wow, that was great for me. I'm still coaching, was still coaching at the time, and it's like, okay, that was one, it was kind of fun to be coached, and two, it's like this was uncomfortable for me. I was bad at something. I was there trying to get better at it. Like it was good for me to go into that spot and to become the learner again. And then actually this current school year, my oldest son, he's 6. He wanted to learn to play piano, and I've said for a while, one of my biggest regrets from childhood is not learning to play an instrument. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna do it. I'm just gonna start. Like and I had some limiting beliefs there internally, like I'm not a musical person, etc. Whatever. It's like whatever, I'm gonna do it. I want my son to see me try new things, learn new things, etc. And this is just gonna get me outside of my comfort zone. And it has. It's been exactly that. Again, it's just like going back into the seat of being a learner and getting coaching from someone, trying something new. I think it is so important for coaches, again, because we can just get so wrapped up in this sport, this job, this team. It's like, actually, maybe step away from it. Go learn something new. Go get coached in something, or maybe it's get coached in this area like you're talking about. But I think all of those can be so helpful and healthy for us as people as we're trying to achieve awesome things, but to remind us, to still be growing, and then, yeah, to just have some balance in our life.
I really love those two examples. Like those are like perfect illustrations of what we were just talking about there with coaches, going outside of their comfort zone and then like experiencing like what it feels like again to be coached. Like because again, like you're going to start to learn like different ways that you might be thinking about it, like things that like maybe somebody else does and how they coach that you could apply, or um, as much as you sometimes learn what you like and what is helpful, you also learn what's not helpful. But I think at the heart of that, it goes to we ask our players to be coachable. We ask our players to be coached and like to grow every single day. And it's just ironic to me sometimes that we're hesitant to turn the mirror towards ourselves or face the mirror toward ourselves and do the same. And I think the one thing I wanted to just point out, you mentioned like the word like limiting beliefs, which I think is like not everybody's always aware of that. So I think the fact that like you acknowledge that like speaks to like your advanced kind of thought and like the depth of understanding that you have of yourself too, because going back to like that equation or framework that I had, individual times the environment minus interference, when I where the gold is when you start to remove interference. Like, yes, we can do all the work with the individual, helping you develop more consistent habits, help you increase your bandwidth through your capacity and manage your time and define your personal scoreboard, all that. All of it very valuable. Though one of the fastest ways that we get in our own way is through interference. And now, again, sometimes coaches will say they put that on something outside of themselves. I don't have time. I don't have money. I don't have the resource, whatever. But when you actually start to listen and you ask different questions, what you may start to realize is it maybe is a limiting belief because maybe it's the fact that like you feel like you're the person that always has the answers and you can't look and appear as if you don't. Or maybe again, it's the perfectionism that shows up in a way where you're hesitant to relinquish control. And therefore, you are pushing yourself on empty, and your bandwidth, your capacity is being depleted day in and day out because you're trying to do it all and you have a never ending to do list. But really, what's getting in the way is the interference through something else. And I think that to me is where really the gold in the coaching work comes in. And that's no different from coaches working with players too. It's the player that shows up saying, hey, like I don't I want to come in today and I work on, my swing or I work on my mechanics and things like that. And like, but underneath, like, what you really need to have the conversation about is that self-doubt that you have right now, or acknowledging what you're feeling, or, it's that kind of situation. And I think sometimes we forget that it applies to all of us.
Yeah, yeah, our beliefs fuel a lot. Uh, Talk about building an environment where we can foster winning and it's sustainable for the people you lead. You mentioned that earlier, and I want to make sure we hit on it before we wrap up this conversation. Talk more about that.
Yeah, I'll try to be kind of brief to it, but I think like for me, when I think about the environment, it's really boiled down to how do I create a space for people to do their best work? And that's really like that's what you're trying to do as a coach, whether it's with your staff, your players, and so on. In order to do that, I think that there's kind of four cornerstones, four kind of pillars, if you will, that kind of help create a robust, sustainable environment. I think one is culture, which gets talked about a lot. I think culture really kind of boils down to, I kind of frame it as like you define it, like you define what's important to you, what standards you're going to be guided by, what values you're going to be guided by. If you do have certain rules, um, what in essence is the identity of our team and our environment. So that's the culture. And again, there's a lot out there that, talk about that. I think the connection piece now is how do you build it? And so connection, because connection is really at the foundation, I think, of commitment. So for example, like it's a lot easier to commit to a team when you feel a sense of connection to those around you. And that's where I think the relationships come into play, the trust building comes into play. And so as a coach, how are you fostering that trust? How are you leveraging, or leveraging is probably the wrong choice of words here, but like how are you creating an environment that's psychologically safe for people to not only fit in, but also to stand out and have a sense of belonging and ownership to it. So there's the connection piece. So working with coaches on how they communicate more effectively, how do they um, leverage storytelling and utilize different messages and things like that to connect their people to again the vision, the culture, and so on. Third is development, which is about how do you grow it. So again, I think great organizations, they don't just develop players, they develop their staff and their people. And so an example with this would be, if you're a college coach or an NFL coach or whoever, like at any level, it's like, how are you deliberate not only in ensuring that when you leave the building each day, your players have gotten better, but how has your staff gotten better? And how are you creating an environment for them to grow as well, and how are you giving them feedback? How are you um, helping them connect to resources? How are you giving them time so that way they can go grow and that they do have time to pour into themselves and invest in their own growth and development and so on. So I think that's where I think development comes down to how do you grow it. And then the last bit is about systems, which is a really broad term, but now it's like your systems are going to determine can you sustain it? Because that's where what I'm really interested in is not only how do you create a high performing environment once or for one season or for one team, but how do you now sustain that over time? And what's your system for doing so? So, an example could be let's use college sports because it's so dynamic now with players and the turnover and people just in and out year to year. What is your system for helping players get connected to your culture, your identity, your values, your standards? Not only get connected to it, but then what's your system for helping them have ownership in that as well? Because people are more likely to commit to things that they help create. So you may have a culture that's already set in place, but now, how do you help each individual player have their own fingerprint on it? And what's your system around that? What's that look like? So, those are things that I'm thinking about. How do you onboard not just players, but staff? How do you hire, right, effectively? Like, how do you hire staff that are going to complement you as well, and different things like that. And so, anyway, for me, those I think are like kind of four cornerstones of what I think goes into a sustainable, high performing environment, which again is ultimately rooted in how do we help people do their best work. And again, what I'm listening for through my questions is where is there a breakdown or things to build off of in those.
Yeah, that's really good. I think it's also just worth taking a second to say for coaches listening that might be intimidated by the systems word that you're probably already doing it. and it can be simpler than you think. It really is just how do you create these shared norms or group habits to fuel these things that we're talking about, right? So you talked about culture and defining it. Your system for that might be that your first team meeting every year, you're reviewing your team values, you're setting a team identity, and then at the end of every week, you're celebrating certain things where coaches, players lived out. You know what I mean? Like it's actually not super complicated. It's just deciding, putting honestly time on the calendar of like, we're going to define our culture here. We're going to reinforce it in this way each day or every month or whatever. Like we're going to award these awards at the end of games or highlight these things in our film session every Monday or Tuesday that reinforce our cultural values. The connection piece that's like, you know, maybe your system for that is that hey, every new transfer into our program gets paired with a peer mentor and they've got to eat lunch together once a week, or we have this new orientation where you know what I mean, like it's just like you build in these onboarding checklists, these things that people go through to make it happen or more likely that it does happen. You talked about development too of your staff. What's your system for that? Okay, we have a meeting every Friday where everyone's expected to come share one new thing they learned. That's it. And it's like it's 3 minutes. It's short, it's small, but like everybody's expected to come contribute. Or we pair each coach with another coach as a peer mentor, and they have to eat lunch together every week. Like it's I just want to say like it doesn't have to be super complicated. It does have to be intentional though, right? There is a deliberate system or expectation in place of this is how we do it here, or these are the ways that we're trying to foster this thing that we want to get to. Because I think sometimes the coaches hear, oh, we got all these systems in place. It's like, what does that mean? Or that sounds complicated. So, no, it's just deciding that we're going to do these things to try to make sure that we accomplish these things. Am I on the right track there? Like, if you're like, no, Luke, that was stupid, tell me. But that's how I think about it.
No, I think that was phenomenal. That was a great addition to it because I think you're right. And it's a good reminder for me. Like that word is maybe in some cases we don't all it's not part of maybe the normal lexicon of words that we use day to day, and it can have different meanings. But I think what you describe is spot on. Like even just your example about how do you foster, something where players are getting connected, with one another, or staff are taking time to share what they're learning. Like it's a great reminder that like you already have systems in place, right? Like if you're doing a debrief as a staff, like in a staff meeting after each game and you're discussing things like that's a system. Like you have a system for growth, a system for development. The question now is like, is it, to your words, like, is it intentional, or can it be simplified down? Like, is it effective? Like, is it producing the results that you want it to be producing? And so I think that's a great addition from your perspective. I think too, the one thing you made me think of, I'll share just a very quick story is I did this in another email newsletter. I talked about there's a Japanese airport called Kansai International Airport, and they just had 30 years in a row of not having lost a single piece of luggage. 30 years in a row of not losing a single piece of luggage. Now, I don't
I
know about
lost
you, but like,
luggage last night, Zach. I'm not kidding. I'm glad you brought this up. DFW, you lost my luggage. I'm not happy about it. I need those kid car seats. Sorry, keep going with your story. But I resonate with this deeply. I wish I had flown out of there.
as a fellow dad, we got to get Luke his car seats. Okay, like we
Gotta
got to
get
get
them.
this taken care of pronto. So that's gonna be the first thing that we do when we hit stop here is we're gonna get on the phone with DFW, or we're gonna tweet at them and say, hey, listen, what's going on? Um, so what I think is cool though is so NPR did kind of a news story about this. I think it was last year, maybe 2 years ago, and they interviewed a gentleman who was like kind of in charge of like safety systems, operations, and things like that. And they were kind of asking him like, it was clear like they were trying to get out like, hey, what's the secret here? Like, what are you guys doing? Like, and what was awesome is there was no necessarily like high tech, high uh, high costly like technology or advanced technology or anything like that. He basically was like, we count the number of bags that go on the plane. When they come off, we count the number of bags that come off of it. He's like, if we lose a bag, we'll make sure that we send the whole unit, like or at least everybody that's available to go try to find the bag. And then he added like one little detail. He's like, oh, and then like as a bonus, like when we put it on the carousel, we have the handle face outward, so that way it's easier for the customers and the flyers to like retrieve their bag and carry on with their day. That's kind of like a bonus detail, but it just shows you like the attention to detail that they take pride in. But what I loved about it is like there was nothing sexy about that. Like there was nothing advanced about that. Like that is a very bare bones, simple system. To your point earlier, it's not complicated, but it is intentional. And I think that's the thing that I think elite performers have the same thing, do the same thing with their systems, and elite coaches do the same thing with their systems. And so I just think that that's a really brilliant add on from your end of like, these don't have to be complicated, but they do need to be intentional.
Yeah, I love it. Zach, this has been awesome. Before we wrap it up, I've got 3 rapid fire questions for you. I just want you to share the first thing that comes to your mind from your work now coaching coaches, or it can be from your time coaching athletes. Here's the first one. The most fun part of coaching is blank.
I think just being part of other people's journey. And I think going back to that mountain analogy, it's like it's very fun to like I'm not telling people what mountain they need to climb, but like they're coming to me and being like, "Hey, this is where I want to go. This is my dream." And then just being a part of that journey with them to me is really cool because I think it's like certainly it's always great, obviously, when you help them or you see them get to achieve their dreams or their goals or reach whatever summit they've set for themselves. But I think it's even better too when you've been part of like the low moments too. And again, when the terrain all of a sudden becomes stressful and challenging and things like that. So to see people kind of overcome those things or just navigate those things and just be a space for them to not be alone in that pursuit. That to me is the fun part.
Second one, I wish I would have known blank before my first coaching experience.
I think in maybe the spirit of how I'm drawing a blank here is don't underestimate the value of silence. And the reason being is because I do think that there's a lot of moments I've very much felt this where like you get asked something and like you don't know the answer or you don't know if you have an immediate response to it. And I think being a great coach isn't just what you say and what you communicate, but I think it's how you listen. And I think you can't do that if you're not silent. The one thing I'll say with it is, I heard this, I think I saw this on like a meme or something like that, but I was like, oh, this is pretty cool, where it's basically like if you take the word listen and you rearrange all the letters, it can spell silent. And so if like people want to know how do you become a better listener, it's like, oh, it's easy, just rearrange the letters and just be silent. And again, it's not quite that simple per se, but again, I think it's in silence where you can truly hear somebody and then help them feel seen, heard, or valued, and just hold space there. So that to me, I wish I would have been even more intentional because when I first took the job, even in pro ball, like especially early on, like you don't want to fumble, like you don't want to make a mistake, you don't want to say the wrong thing, but like you immediately jump to like giving everybody everything you got, and sometimes I felt like I made mistakes that way or I deterred people that way.
I think most coaches tend to be fixers, and we want to hop
Yeah.
in there and fix and help, and sometimes we need to be silent. It probably, yeah, I'm laughing because I need to do it in my marriage more often, probably with my kids too. The last one, I know I'm successful as a coach when blank.
I think when every day you are I think invigorated by what you get to do and how you get to show up and who you get to serve. And I think that to me has been one of the coolest parts of the role that I've had, but also like I think the role that I'm really kind of stepping into is I feel having conversations with others like yourself that I think are very passionate about these things. I think it's very invigorating. And again, regardless of somebody else's success per se from society standpoint, to me, I think if I can help be a piece of them feeling like they're more clear on their own personal scoreboard and be excited to be in alignment with that, I think on a day-to-day basis, to me, that's the success that I think I'm most interested in.
Zach, this has been awesome. Tons of value for coaches and appreciate your time. Before we hop off, share with coaches where they can learn more about you, your work, subscribe to your newsletter, contact you if they want to work with you, etc. Anything you want to share with them before we wrap it up.
Sure. Yeah, just two things. I think one from a contact standpoint. I'm on a few different social media platforms, so X or Twitter, whatever we want to call it nowadays, LinkedIn, probably the two that I'm most active on. So you can find me there. There's ways that you can get a hold of me in that. And then I do have the newsletter. So I have an email newsletter that I try to send out on a somewhat regular cadence if I've got something. So it's called Winning with Words. And so if any coaches are out there, and it's basically just I try to share, stories, principles, clips, and things like that that I think are interesting and kind of can be helpful for coaches to add to their playbook on helping their players master the inner game. So that's where you can find me there. And then I have a podcast that it's currently titled The Threshold Lab. I'm actually currently rebranding that, so that hasn't quite made been public yet, but it'll soon be called the Win Better. I'm sorry, I don't even have the name right. Win More, Live Better podcast. So if anybody is interested in these types of stories like the Kansai International Airport, the gap versus the gain, the personal scoreboard, those types of things, I try to share those in the podcast as well, and then have conversations with sport coaches on a lot of the topics that we've covered today. So that's one. Those are ways to get connected. But then I also just want to give a lot of gratitude towards you because one of the things I appreciated was when you do some of these conversations, you quickly discover like who has done a little bit of homework on the front end, versus who haven't. Like you clearly had, but also you did a really wonderful job of not only, I think, asking really nice, like open-ended questions, but then simply holding space and then building off of it. Like it was very evident, like again, using the word listening, like listening and being silent. Like I thought you did not that this was you matters what I think, but like as a fellow podcast host, I know how that's not always an easy thing to do and make these conversations sometimes flow. And I thought you did that splendidly, at least from a guest standpoint, it made it very smooth. So I just want to give you a shout out for just how you are as a facilitator of these conversations, but also the work that you're continuing to do and the resource that this podcast is for your audience as well.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Zach. That means a lot. And coaches, I subscribe to Zach's newsletters, and we all get a lot of emails. His are good though. I actually open them and read them, so I'd recommend it. Go get some free value there. So, hey, Zach, thanks again for your time, man. Appreciate you. Keep it up, and I love the work you're doing to serve coaches.
Thanks, Luke.
Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast, and a huge thanks to Zach for joining me. To learn more about Zach and his work, or to get a free PDF of the episode notes, check out the links and the show details. And if you're interested in joining our free online community of hundreds of coaches from across sports, or becoming one of our Nike Sports Camp directors, you can also check out links to learn more or to join in the show details. Thanks for listening to the podcast.